Oh my! My scream echoed through the air.
Honestly, how many times do I have to say it? When the glass is empty, pour the beer right away.
Oh dear, the glass is broken. Isabella, clean it up quickly.
Honestly, when will you grow up?
This is insane. Why are these people so nonchalant about doing such things? My name is Isabella, a 26-year-old housewife. I've always been slow-witted. From the moment I entered elementary school, I realized I was falling behind. I was scolded by teachers countless times. Why couldn't I do such simple things? My parents are neither particularly enthusiastic about education nor completely neglectful. When my test scores were poor, they'd say, "Do better next time," and when it continued, they suggested, "How about going to a cram school?" I tried attending a cram school once, but the teacher's pace was too fast for me to keep up. Gradually, I became reluctant to go, and I started spending time at the park instead. However, I was soon caught when the cram school contacted my parents because I hadn't been showing up. I ended up quitting the cram school. That's when things started to go downhill for me. The moment I gave up, realizing that nothing could be done, everything became inconsequential, and I started hanging out with a bad crowd. Middle school was the worst time. Every day, we loitered at a convenience store, getting into cigarettes and alcohol. I'd leave home after my parents went to sleep and return before they woke up. That cycle continued. As a result, attending regular classes during the day was impossible, and I spent most days just sleeping. It was like going to school only for lunch. Later, I managed to get into a high school where you could enroll just by writing your name, but I had no motivation to study and dropped out. At that time, I left home after endless arguments with my parents, creating a rift between us. Since then, I've been working tirelessly at part-time jobs while living alone. But as I started working and living independently, I realized how much my parents had supported my life. The chores my mother did as a matter of course weren't actually ordinary, and my father going to work every day wasn't a given. I understood how I had taken their support for granted and how naive I had been. Still, back then, due to a mix of pride and embarrassment, I couldn't bring myself to visit my parents and apologize. After that, I resolved to live earnestly. In between my part-time jobs, I revisited the basics of compulsory education. 3 years later, I passed the GED exam and decided to take the evening courses at a university. Somehow, I managed to scrape by with the minimum passing score. I was overjoyed. Although it was a lower-ranked university, it's incredible that someone like me, who used to be foolish, could go to university. Feeling a bit embarrassed, I wrote a letter to my family, sharing only the news that I had been accepted to an evening university without revealing my address. From then on, I continued my life, working during the day and attending university at night. The evening university attracted a diverse crowd. There were men in suits who perhaps came after work, as well as older women who wanted to relearn. Interacting with these people allowed me to understand various perspectives, and I consider it a valuable experience. After graduating from university, I landed an office job at a small company. If my old friends saw me now, they'd surely be surprised. My life had changed significantly. And my life took another turn, a meeting with Michael. Michael was a senior colleague at the same company. He was the one who taught me the ropes when I joined. Eventually, he started inviting me out for meals, and our relationship naturally blossomed. 3 years later, he proposed, and we got married. He wanted me to focus on our home, so I decided to leave my job. I never dreamed that the rebellious girl I once was would end up leaving her job for marriage. When it came to informing my parents about the marriage, I could only do so through a letter. After all, we had parted ways in a heated argument back then, and I feared they might no longer care about me. Following our marriage, I ended up living with my in-laws in their home. My husband was the eldest son, and it was customary for the in-laws to live together. During the marriage introduction, I didn't have a negative impression of my in-laws, and there was a part of me that craved family love, so I agreed to cohabitate without much thought. Little did I know that this would mark the beginning of a living hell. I began experiencing severe mistreatment from my in-laws and husband.
Isabella! Your cleaning is far too slow. Bathroom, toilet, weeding the garden. Do it more efficiently.
Hey! I asked for tea. How long do I have to wait? Unbelievable!
Hey, for breakfast, I prefer bread.
I'll have yogurt. Mornings are for yogurt and fruit.
My in-laws and husband were shamelessly demanding. Despite this, I clung to the strange notion that I needed their approval to be accepted by this family and in this house. So, I continued to be meek. Unfortunately, this only fueled their audacity even further.
Isabella, give me a massage.
Ah, excellent. I'll be next.
Well then, after Dad, maybe I'll get one too.
One person, 30 minutes each, for a total of an hour and a half of massages. And afterward, I brewed tea and served store-bought dessert to everyone, as if I were a housekeeper. I gradually began to suspect that I was being used for their convenience by my in-laws and husband. As a result, imperfections started creeping into the household chores I had previously executed flawlessly, and my in-laws and husband began blaming me for those shortcomings. Their tyranny escalated, and before I knew it, my in-laws and husband had turned into terrible manipulative individuals. Oh my! My scream echoed through the air.
Honestly, how many times do I have to say it? When the glass is empty, pour the beer right away.
He slammed the table as he spoke. The impact caused a glass to fall at my feet.
Oh dear, the glass is broken. Isabella, clean it up quickly.
Honestly, when will you grow up?
This was madness. How could these people be so callous? I had reached my breaking point. I wanted to go home. But where? To my mom's place? Yet, I was afraid. Would they accept me? Still, I knew that remaining in this house would drive me mentally unstable, so I made up my mind and left.
Where are you going?
Leave her alone. She's been disowned by her parents, so this is the only place she has to go.
Despite my husband's words, I ignored him and left my in-laws' home. And after approximately 10 years, I arrived in front of my parents' home. As I hesitated to press the intercom button, a voice came from behind.
Isabella.
It was my mother's voice. Mom. The moment I saw my mother, tears welled up uncontrollably. She was also crying, and she embraced me tightly. She welcomed me into the house, and there, I met my father after a long time. Holding back tears, he said, "Welcome back." I felt overjoyed. My parents didn't harbor any resentment toward me. Even after I had left without a word, they warmly received me after a decade apart. Awkwardly, I recounted everything that had happened since I left. Both my father and mother praised me, saying, "You've done well. They were pleased with my letter updates as well. As for the matter with my in-laws and husband, they were furious on my behalf. They advised me to divorce that person without hesitation. A few hours later, I received a message from my husband.
Where are you now? It's time to come back.
I replied, I'm currently at my parents' house. I won't return to that home anymore, so let's get a divorce. Almost immediately, my husband called. His angry voice made it hard to understand what he was saying, but it seemed he wanted to come here to persuade me. My parents suggested, it's a good opportunity to meet face to face, so we decided to invite my in-laws and husband over. When my in-laws arrived at my parents' home, they unleashed a torrent of insults fueled by anger. Back when I lived with them, I was somewhat fragile due to my longing for family love. However, now that I had reconciled with my own parents, that vulnerability had disappeared. Without succumbing to their verbal abuse, I firmly handed them the divorce papers, saying, it's pointless no matter what you say. Please sign for the divorce. In the end, my husband reluctantly signed the papers, rolling his eyes. Finally, I was free from those nightmarish days. And in the blink of an eye, 5 years had passed since the divorce. It was a holiday, and I was relaxing at my parents' home as usual. Suddenly, the intercom buzzed. Who could it be on a Saturday morning? Since I was closest to the front door, I decided to answer. But then the intercom buzzed again. Hello? Oh, excuse me. Wait, what? When I opened the door, there stood my ex-husband and in-laws, the same people I had parted ways with 5 years ago. Why? How? My ex-husband grinned and said,
Hey there! You doing well? I figured you'd calm down by now. I'll forgive you, so come back, ha!
What are you talking about? My shout drew my father's attention, and he joined me at the entrance. He too was surprised by their presence. My ex-husband continued smirking.
You're probably still a lonely single woman, right? We'll take you back.
And then my ex-father-in-law, audaciously, chimed in.
Grandmother needs care too. Let's discuss the future.
Their nonsensical statements made me burst into laughter. Impossible.
Why are you laughing?
My ex-father-in-law snapped.
Exactly. How dare you, a lowly woman, be so cheeky?
My ex-mother-in-law chimed in. I replied. Well, I was just thinking, who's speaking from a high horse here? My ex-husband retorted.
What? Who do you think you're being cheeky with?
He seemed to believe that his forceful tone, reminiscent of our cohabitation days, would sway me. Little did he know that over these 5 years, I had regained the determination I had as a former delinquent, a strong woman who wouldn't be shaken. Huh? Obviously, I'm talking to you. This abusive jerk. My ex-husband and in-laws stuttered, taken aback by my intensity. Suddenly, my voice surprised my mother, who approached, saying,
Isabella, calm down. The baby just woke up.
I apologized while cradling my daughter. Oops. Sorry.
A baby?
I explained. I've remarried and have a child now. So, there's no chance of reconciliation with you. Not that I intend to, anyway.
You're kidding.
My ex-husband, clearly frustrated by the lack of compliance, retorted and kicked the flower bed outside the front door. I hurried inside, ensuring my daughter's safety, while my ex-husband attempted to force his way in. My father stepped in to stop him. In the next moment, my ex-husband let out a cry of pain.
Ouch!
Noah. Noah was my current husband. It seemed he had returned from his night shift just in time. Noah twisted my ex-husband's arm.
What are you doing?
You! What the hell? Let go!
My ex-father-in-law chimed in.
Release my son! I'll call the police!
Noah replied.
Huh? I am the police.
Ah!
Noah turned to me.
Isabella, who are these people?
Ex-husband and in-laws. They suddenly showed up, trying to force a reconciliation. When I resisted, my ex-husband got angry and kicked the flower bed.
Wait, hey. You don't need to explain so clearly.
Noah declared.
They're completely out of line. I'll call for backup.
This is ridiculous.
Soon after, a police car arrived, and my ex-in-laws and ex-husband were taken away. The neighbors watched like curious onlookers, and my ex-in-laws and ex-husband hung their heads in embarrassment as they got into the police car. And the reason my ex-in-laws and ex-husband visited me was as follows. It turns out that they had been squandering Michael's grandfather's inheritance and grandmother's pension, indulging in gambling and a life of luxury. However, when his grandmother's health deteriorated, and she needed care, her pension was being used to cover the costs of her care facility. So, they decided to call me back and try to take advantage of my family's wealth. They probably assumed that if they shouted at me, I would comply with their demands. They completely underestimated me. Upon learning that I had remarried a police officer, my ex-in-laws and ex-husband likely decided never to involve themselves with me again. By the way, let me share how I ended up marrying a police officer. During my evening university days, I became close friends with a woman in her 50s who was in the same seminar. Even after graduation, we continued to meet up for drinks regularly. After my divorce from my ex-husband, she suggested that I meet her nephew, Noah. We hit it off, and that's how we ended up getting married. Life is unpredictable, and I never imagined finding happiness through such connections and bonds. Moving forward, I plan to enjoy each day while nurturing a good relationship with my husband, parents, and watching my daughter grow.
How did you find this story? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.
I am Luna, 32 years old, living with my husband and son. I joined the company as a new graduate and have been working there for 10 years now. When I gave birth, I took maternity leave, but I returned to work immediately after my son turned 1, and I continue to work vigorously in a sales position. Thanks to my hard work, I am on the verge of a promotion, and recently, work has become even more enjoyable. On the other hand, my husband, who is 3 years younger, has been restless and changing jobs even before we got married. He aims to start his own business someday, believing that to become a future entrepreneur, it's essential to gain skills by working in various companies rather than staying in one place. However, when I look at my husband's current situation, his salary decreases with each job change. I have doubts about whether he is truly improving his skills. Despite that, I felt it was my responsibility to support our household while encouraging my husband's dreams. I wanted to believe in his potential. However, my husband betrayed me. He used an unthinkable method to trap me. During the first couple of years of our marriage, my husband and I got along well. Our life wasn't easy due to his unstable job, but spending time with my husband dreaming about building our own home and traveling abroad was enjoyable. However, things changed after I gave birth to our son. My husband became noticeably cold towards me. Looking back, perhaps he hadn't changed much himself. It was having a child that made me realize his true nature. While my husband had never been keen on household chores, he particularly disliked childcare. When I was on maternity or childcare leave and stayed at home, things were manageable. But once I returned to work after my childcare leave, my days became a whirlwind. I woke up early to prepare breakfast for my family and take our son to daycare. After work, I rushed to pick him up, did the grocery shopping, and prepared dinner. I barely had time to catch my breath. I could have used an extra pair of hands. Yet, my husband seemed oblivious to my struggles. Despite having more free time than I did, he adamantly refused to take our son to daycare. When I asked him why, he said he didn't want to be perceived as someone with too much free time if he did the school run as a father. I tried to convince him that it's perfectly normal for men to be involved in parenting these days. In fact, I saw plenty of fathers in suits doing school drop-offs at the daycare. However, no matter what I said, my husband remained stubbornly resistant. Avoiding arguments, I eventually gave in. Balancing work, household chores, and childcare was tough for me, especially with early mornings and overtime at the office. But I persevered for the sake of our family. It would have been helpful if there were someone who could admonish my husband. Unfortunately, the only person he fears, my father-in-law, is currently away on a business trip. My father-in-law always praised me for balancing work and household chores, understanding the demands of my job. Even when my pregnancy was confirmed, he advised my husband,
Take good care of Luna.
However, shortly after our son was born, my father-in-law was transferred far away. My mother-in-law stayed behind in our hometown. Unfortunately, unlike my father-in-law, she dotes on her son excessively and only takes my husband's side, so I couldn't rely on her at all. With her extensive experience as a homemaker, my mother-in-law didn't seem pleased that I continued working after giving birth. Additionally, she must have been bothered by the fact that her own son kept changing jobs without making significant progress. It seems she felt frustrated that I, as the daughter-in-law, achieved more in my career. Every time we met, she made snide remarks about me prioritizing work over my roles as a wife and mother. While she surely knows that my work contributes to our current lifestyle, she still criticized me. Eventually, she started saying absurd things like how it's pitiful to leave my child at daycare until late or that I should quit my job altogether. Perhaps my mother-in-law's idle time during my father-in-law's business trips fueled her behavior. She would casually drop by our house, deliver her barbs, and leave. Although I felt unfairly blamed, I resigned myself to the fact that some people with outdated views might never understand. Unfortunately, my husband seemed to resent my professional success. When I received a raise for my efforts, I excitedly shared the news with him, hoping for at least a congratulatory word. Instead, his response was a dismissive,
Oh, really?
"It hurt." As time went on, my husband's attitude worsened. He started berating me, saying things like,
Don't get too full of yourself just because you're earning a bit more.
The constant criticism from my husband and even my mother-in-law left me questioning why I was working so hard every day. I began regretting my decision to marry him. To make matters worse, my husband's late nights became routine. Despite working at a factory where he should have regular hours, he often returned home well past midnight. When I asked him why, he always claimed it was work-related. I didn't believe that could be true, but whenever I tried to inquire further, he'd become irritable. So I refrained from pressing the issue, but I couldn't help feeling suspicious about his unnatural behavior. And then, finally, an incident occurred. One evening, my mother-in-law suddenly dropped by our house unannounced. While her impromptu visits were nothing new, that particular day left me feeling utterly drained. You see, earlier in the day, there had been a daycare sports event, and I had worked late, waking up early to prepare lunch boxes. I was exhausted and had planned to go to bed early, especially since an important business meeting awaited me the next morning. My son, worn out from the sports event, had already dozed off in his bedroom after dinner. However, with my mother-in-law's arrival, I couldn't simply retire for the night. Determined, I dragged my tired body to the kitchen to prepare some tea. However, at that moment, my husband suddenly grabbed my arm tightly. Surprised, I looked at his face.
You must be tired, so I'll take care of it.
My husband rarely steps into the kitchen, so I was taken aback. Normally, he insists that I handle everything, cooking, cleaning, and more, no matter how exhausted I am from work. Perhaps he wanted to impress my mother-in-law. I thought it was probably just empty words, so I ignored him and headed back to the kitchen. But my husband wouldn't let go of my arm. This time, with a stern tone.
Just sit down and rest.
He forcibly seated me on the sofa. I felt trapped. If I allowed my husband to make tea for me, I knew my mother-in-law would have something to say. Surely, she'd criticize me for being a demanding wife. However, to my surprise, even my mother-in-law chimed in.
Luna, it's okay to sit.
She gently held me down and smiled. While I conversed with my mother-in-law, my husband went into the kitchen and started brewing tea. Something is amiss. There's no way both of them suddenly had a change of heart. What's going on today? As I pondered my suspicions, my husband approached with a teacup on a tray.
Well, have some tea.
He placed the cup in front of me, smiling. I thanked him while keeping a close eye on his behavior. It seemed my husband kept glancing at me. Even my mother-in-law appeared more restless than usual. Definitely strange. I lowered my gaze to the tea my husband had brewed. I see now. He must be up to something. Yes, there had to be a reason behind their unnatural kindness. I wasn't about to fall into their trap. No more mercy. I was ready. I lifted the teacup but paused just before taking a sip. By the way, didn't we have some tea snacks in the fridge? Let's offer them to Mom, I said, facing my husband. Normally, my husband wouldn't bother serving tea snacks to guests. But today, after telling me to rest, he had no choice but to comply. Initially bewildered, he eventually conceded.
Oh, right.
He headed back to the kitchen to fetch the treats. My mother-in-law followed suit, saying,
Oh dear, thanks.
I seized the opportunity. As my husband returned with the tea snacks, I finally took a sip from the teacup. My mother-in-law, sitting next to me, also began sipping her tea. We engaged in light conversation for a while, showing my son's sports day videos to my mother-in-law. However, both my husband and mother-in-law continued to stare at me unnaturally. Despite feeling their sharp gazes, I calmly finished my tea. Observing my composure, my husband tilted his head in confusion. Just when I thought everything would proceed without incident, a sudden change occurred. My mother-in-law's complexion darkened, and she furrowed her brow. Then, she clutched her stomach and rushed out of the living room with surprising speed. Her destination? The bathroom, of course. I had suspected something was amiss, and now it seemed my intuition was correct. Glancing at my husband, his eyes remain wide open, and he looks utterly bewildered. Then, in an instant, he shoots me a piercing glare and hurries to follow my mother-in-law. As he pounds on the bathroom door, he calls out,
Mom, are you okay?
From inside the bathroom, my mother-in-law emitted pained groans, though I couldn't quite make out her words. Well, I could imagine the situation fairly well. A few minutes later, my husband returned to the living room, leaving my mother-in-law in the bathroom. His face had turned pale, and he nervously bit his lip. I addressed him. You know, it seems you put something quite suspicious in my tea. His eyes widened, and he exclaimed,
So it was you after all.
I chuckled and replied, No. It was you, wasn't it? Since the tea you served me seemed incredibly dubious, I discreetly swapped it with your mom's. My husband spat out.
You're a terrible wife. Suspecting me.
I couldn't help but burst into laughter. Well, who's worse, really? I retorted. You probably spiked it with laxatives or something. The strange powder clinging to the rim and inside of the teacup gave it away. Indeed, there was a faint white powdery substance on the cup. If my husband were someone who regularly brewed tea, I might not have been suspicious. But he never did any household chores, and my mother-in-law believed it was only natural to boss me around. The fact that both of them went out of their way to make me rest was highly unlikely. So, I had been carefully observing my husband's actions and the tea he served. My husband's ill-conceived plot was exposed, and he confessed everything. However, the motive behind his attempt to spike my drink with a laxative was so trivial that it left me utterly bewildered. Apparently, upon learning that I had an important business meeting the next day, he conspired with my mother-in-law to sabotage my work. If their plan had succeeded, I would have either cancelled the meeting due to illness or found myself repeatedly rushing to the bathroom during negotiations with our client. Such a situation could have negatively impacted my professional reputation at the company. Yet, tampering with someone's beverage is undeniably a criminal act. Why would both my husband and mother-in-law go to such lengths to undermine me? I find their actions pitiable. After being completely exposed and defiant, my husband glared at me.
If anything happens to Mom, I'll demand compensation.
But I retorted, What are you talking about? You're the one who should pay compensation. I chuckled and added, I know you've been cheating all along. His expression froze in an instant. Despite having plenty of free time, he always claimed to be busy with work, returning home late. Even on his days off, he'd go out alone, leaving almost no time for family. When he was home, he'd be glued to his smartphone. Suspicious of his infidelity, I hired a private investigator to track his actions. The results were as expected. My husband had been deceiving me. He pretended to be single at a mixer, got close to a young woman, and spun tales about upcoming business ventures. She, fresh out of school and naive, fell for his lies. Later, my husband tried to justify it, claiming that dating a younger woman boosted his confidence. I could almost picture him puffing up, bragging about his future as a CEO. But if he had that much free time, he should have put more effort into achieving his goals. Instead, it seemed my husband, like a spoiled child, was chasing an impossible dream of entrepreneurship. Surprisingly, my husband, caught in his infidelity, turned pale and froze. I looked him straight in the eye. Let's get a divorce. You'll pay alimony, of course, and child support. His defeated response was,
Fine, whatever.
But then he tried to assert himself.
Just so you know, if we divorce, I'll take half of our savings. I know you've been secretly hoarding money.
I chuckled and sighed. You won't get a share of my assets. Most of the remaining savings are from when I was single. The pre-marriage savings aren't subject to division. he retorted.
What? That can't be true. Besides, you've been earning lately.
I decided to enlighten him. The recent earnings have mostly gone toward living expenses since you contribute very little. His face fell. Then I added, by the way, every piece of furniture and every appliance in this house was bought with my money. So don't even think about taking them when you leave. This house is in my name, so please gather your belongings and leave. As my mother-in-law emerged from the bathroom looking defeated, I told her, I'll be informing your husband about this. She pleaded,
Please. Don't tell him.
but I didn't hesitate. I contacted my father-in-law. Naturally, he was furious, and my mother-in-law was handed a swift divorce. Afterward, realizing that he couldn't expect any share of the assets, my husband finally understood his predicament. Despite pleading with me, saying he didn't want to separate and that he couldn't live without me, his apologies now hold no sway over my feelings. I hired a lawyer, and the divorce with my husband was finalized successfully. I claimed substantial compensation for emotional distress and child support. Due to his low income, my husband couldn't pay the compensation in one lump sum, and he ended up burdened with significant debt. But the punishment meted out to him wasn't limited to that. Since I filed a police report about the laxative incident in my tea, both my husband and mother-in-law were convicted of assault. Although they received probation, they now share a criminal record. In the end, my husband was also rejected by his affair partner, and he works tirelessly day and night to repay his debts. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law, abandoned by my father-in-law, leads a miserable life in poverty. They tried to undermine me with baseless jealousy, but they reaped what they sowed. On the other hand, my recent business negotiation was a great success, and I was promoted to lead the sales team. I moved out of the apartment I shared with my husband and rented a new condominium. Now, my son and I live happily together. Although my first marriage ended in failure, I'll continue working diligently and ensure my happiness. Farewell, everyone.
How did you find this story? Please consider subscribing to the channel. Until next time, take care.